The sky over New Haven turned red. Did not understand what the red sky meant. He was 8 years old, and his mind worked in simple ways. Red sky meant something was wrong. His younger sister Sarah grabbed his hand and pointed upward at the massive shape breaking through the clouds. The hunting vessel was designed to inspire fear. Its angular hull was dark gray, covered in sharp edges and protruding sensors. Weapons systems lined its underside like teeth in a predator's mouth. The ship descended slowly, deliberately, giving the humans below time to understand that resistance was pointless. And Sarah stood at the edge of New Haven's residential sector, near the boundary markers that no children were supposed to cross alone, but was brave, or perhaps foolish. He wanted to see what the ship was. Sarah was 6 years old and followed her older brother everywhere. The alarm systems of the colony began to wail. The sound was urgent and terrible. Human colonists emerged from their homes and moved toward the central bunker. Parents grabbed their children. Workers abandoned their tools. The entire settlement moved like a disturbed insect colony, searching for safety. Captain Hayes stood in the command center and watched the ship on multiple screens. She had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 12 years, and she had never seen a vessel this close to human space. The stories about them were not gentle. These hunters took specimens from weaker species. They studied them. Sometimes they returned them, sometimes they did not. His hands moved across the console, powering up the colony's defensive systems. The colony had 3 orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapons. Against the vessel, these might as well have been children throwing rocks at mountains. "Status report," she commanded. "Ship is holding position at 5,000 meters," her weapons officer reported. "They are scanning the settlement. Multiple energy signatures detected in their weapon systems. Our systems are active, but Captain, they could destroy us from where they are standing. We cannot fight them." Knew this, she had known it before the ship appeared. Human colonies existed on 442B because the Galactic Council had permitted it. The neighborhood was relatively safe. They rarely came this far from their usual hunting grounds, but the word rarely is not the same as never. Outside the command center, David and Summers moved through the crowded bunker with desperation in their hearts. They were looking for their children. The bunker was chaos. 2,000 people trying to fit into a space designed for half that number. Children cried. Adults shouted information that no one could hear. Neither parent found their children in the bunker entrance. At the edge of the settlement, felt Sarah's hand shake in his. He wanted to be brave for her, but he was scared too. The ship descended lower and its weapons came online. The defensive platforms fired, sending energy beams at the hunter's shield. The beams struck the shield and dispersed like water against stone. They did not even slow down. A transport pod separated from the main vessel and descended rapidly. It was small, built for speed and precision. Recognized what was happening. This was not a negotiation. This was a taking. The transport pod landed 2 kilometers from where and Sarah stood. Hunters emerged. They were tall creatures, nearly 2.5 meters high, with hard carapace covering their bodies. Their limbs were powerful and efficient. Their eyes were black and empty of any emotion. They moved like predators because they were predators. The hunters scanned the settlement with handheld devices. The devices glowed softly as they gathered information. Temperature, movement, species composition. The commander named Eth led the team. He had hunted across 3 galactic sectors. He had taken specimens from 17 different species. He was skilled, efficient, and utterly confident in his superiority. The scanning device in Eth's claws highlighted a heat signature near the settlement's perimeter. A small human, approximately 9 years old, standard deviation plus 1.3 kilograms lighter than average for the species. Young enough to be adaptable, old enough to survive the capture process. Perfect. Eth pointed in its direction. The hunters moved like running water. They covered 2 kilometers in seconds, saw them coming and tried to run. His small human legs could not match the speed of apex predators. Sarah screamed, pulled at her hand, trying to move them away from the approaching danger. He could feel her weight as she stumbled. He could feel her fear through the grip of her small fingers. The hunters were fast, too fast. One of them fired a stun weapon. The beam struck his chest and his muscles went rigid. His nervous system shut down. He could not move, he could not fight, he could not protect his sister. Sarah screamed his name as he fell. The hunters moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this many times before. One hunter injected with a sedative compound. Another prepared the transport field. Within seconds was lifted from the ground and pulled into the transport pod. He tried to speak, but the sedative was already taking effect. The world became soft and blurry. Sarah was left alone in the dirt. She called for her brother. She called and called and called. The transport pod rose into the sky. The vessel opened its cargo hold. The pod descended into the darkness of the ship's interior. The cargo hold sealed. Within moments, the hunting vessel powered up its engines and began to rise through the atmosphere. Captain Hayes watched on the screens as the took one human child. She watched as the ship climbed higher and higher. She wanted to fire at it, but the defenders would accomplish nothing but their own deaths. She had learned this lesson long ago. The communication system activated. This is Commander Eth of the Collective. We have secured a specimen for study. The specimen is young and in good health. We will conduct research and return it to this location in 90 rotations, provided your settlement cooperates with our resource demands. We will transmit those demands when we reach our home system. The transmission ended. David and Summers emerged from the bunker when the alarm system shut down. They moved through the crowd of people, searching faces, asking if anyone had seen their son. An adult pointed toward the perimeter. Sarah sat in the dirt near the settlement edge. She was alone, she was crying, she was holding something in her small hand. It was shirt torn away during the taking. Woke in a white room that had no corners. The walls curved into each other smoothly. The floor was cold and smooth under his hands. The air smelled like nothing, which was somehow worse than smelling bad. There was a light source somewhere, but could not see where it came from. The light was even and bright, leaving no shadows anywhere. He was alone. There was no furniture in the white room. There was only a transparent wall that showed another room beyond. Through the transparent wall could see shapes and movement. He could see other creatures in other white rooms, a creature with scales, something with too many limbs, a small furry thing that looked terrified. Pressed his hand against the transparent wall. It was hard, it was cold. A sound came from the wall. It was not a voice. It was a tone, high and artificial. Then words appeared on the wall in his language. Remain calm, you are safe, you are being studied. Safe, the word meant nothing to now. The vessel moved through space faster than light. It was designed for efficiency, not comfort. It was designed for hunting and capturing, not care. The ship's interior was all angles and hard surfaces. Everything was made of materials that resisted damage and resisted meaning. Did not know how long he was kept alone in the white room. There was no way to mark time. There was no day cycle. There was only white light that never changed. He had a water dispenser in one corner. He had a waste receptacle in another corner. That kept him alive because dead specimens were useless. Then El came. El was but different from the hunters. The hunters moved with aggression and certainty. El moved with something that might have been hesitation. The caretaker entered the white room through a door that had no visible hinges. I am El, they said. I maintain the specimens. You will cooperate with maintenance procedures. Resistance will result in sedation. Was frightened but he was more frightened of the white room. He stood still as El approached. The caretaker had a scanning device. It moved across body, glowing softly. Vital signs are normal, El said, speaking to a recording device rather than to. No infections. Nutritional needs are being met. Psychological status, elevated stress levels, but within normal parameters for new specimens. Will you send me back? Asked. His voice was small and quiet. El paused, then looked it directly for the first time. That is not a question you should ask. You are a specimen. Specimens do not ask questions. But my family said, my sister was crying. El turned and walked toward the door. You will be returned when the research is complete. This is what the commanders promised. After El left, sat in the white room and thought. He thought about Sarah crying. He thought about his mother and father. He thought about the sky over New Haven, the red sky that had meant something was wrong. Then he thought about the other creatures. He could see through the transparent walls. Over the following rotation, began to watch them. The scaled creature never moved. It simply stood in its white room with its eyes open. The furry creature tried to attack the wall once, then gave up. The creature with too many limbs made no sound and showed no signs of life beyond breathing. They had given up. That was the only explanation. The creatures had decided that resistance was pointless, and they had chosen to simply exist in the white rooms until something changed. Decided something different. He decided not to give up. When El came back for the next maintenance cycle, had a question ready. "Why do you keep us in white rooms?" asked. El made a sound that might have been surprise. "You speak." "I speak," confirmed. "Why are we here?" "You are specimens," El repeated. "The commanders wish to study your species. When the research is complete, you will be returned." "What kind of research?" pressed. "Are we dangerous? Is that why you keep us locked away?" El scanned again. The caretaker's movement seemed less certain than before. "Your species is new to the Galactic Council. Very little data exists about human development and adaptation." "So you capture us," said. "You take us from our homes and lock us in white rooms." "This is how research is conducted," El said. "Your resistance to this process is illogical." "It is not illogical," argued. "It is logical to want to go home. It is logical to want your family. It is logical to be afraid." El completed the maintenance scan without answering, but as the caretaker turned to leave, something was different. El moved more slowly. The certainty was gone. The ship traveled for many rotations, learned to count them by the maintenance cycles. El came regularly, every 16 hours by counting. The caretaker scanned him, checked his vital signs, and provided fresh water and nutritional paste. And each time asked questions. "Do you ever wonder if what you are doing is right?" asked on the 5th cycle. "No," El said. "The hunters are superior. They have evolved beyond question." "But you are not a hunter," observed. "You are a caretaker. You keep us alive. That is a different thing." On the 7th cycle asked, "Do the other creatures have families?" El did not answer immediately. When the response came, it was quieter than before. "Likely, most species develop social bonds." On the 10th cycle said, "My sister's name is Sarah. She is 6 years old. She is scared now. My parents are scared. They do not know what happened to me." El left that cycle without speaking. But something had changed, could feel it. The caretaker's certainty had cracked. Tiny fissures had opened in El's confidence that what the hunters were doing was correct and necessary. Also began to study the ship. Through the transparent wall, he could see corridors beyond his white room. He could see patterns in how El moved through those corridors. He could see the placements of security cameras and monitoring systems. He could see where the walls were thicker and where they were thinner. He could see that the power systems ran through conduits in the upper sections of the corridor walls. The ship had a design, everything had a design, and designs could be understood, designs could be influenced. Spent hours studying the white room. He noticed that the transparent wall had weak points where the material was stressed. He noticed that the water dispenser had an access panel that could be opened with pressure. He noticed that the waste receptacle had a valve system that might be manipulated. The hunters had designed the ship to keep stronger creatures contained. They had designed it for aggressive specimens and predatory prisoners. They had not designed it for something different. They had not designed it to keep out an 8-year-old human who refused to give up. On the 15th cycle, El entered the white room and paused. The caretaker looked at directly. "The ship will reach the home system in 8 rotations," El said. "You will be transferred to asked El a question that changed everything." "What is in the lower containment levels?" he asked on the 18th cycle. El froze. "How do you know about the lower levels?" "I can hear the sound through the floor sometimes," said. This was not entirely true, but it was close enough to sound like the observation of a careful child. "There are sounds down there, different sounds, angry sounds." El's breathing became irregular. For a moment, the caretaker seemed to struggle with something internal, a conflict, a choice between duty and something else. "The lower levels contain specimens with higher aggression ratings," El finally admitted. "They require stronger containment. They require higher sedation levels." "Why pressed? Why are they angrier than me?" "Because they have not yet learned acceptance," El said. "They have not learned that resistance is pointless." "They have not learned that yet," repeated. "So maybe they are smarter than me. Maybe they understand something I do not. Maybe they understand that nothing is ever pointless." El left without speaking, but the caretaker's movement was different, disturbed, uncertain. That night lay on the cold floor of the white room and made a decision. The hunters thought they had won. They thought they had broken the will of all their specimens, But they had made a mistake. They had put an 8-year-old human in a white room and expected him to accept his cage. They had underestimated the most common human response to being trapped, the refusal to accept the trap. The lower levels were where the real power lived. The creatures down there were still angry. They had not accepted their situation. If could reach them, if he could show them that anger was valid, that resistance was possible, then maybe something could change. He began to test the white room. He found that the access panel on the water dispenser could be opened. Inside was a simple valve system that controlled the water flow. He tested the valve carefully, finding the pressure points. He discovered that the system was connected to the wall through a service conduit, a narrow passage just large enough for a human child. The security system in the white room was designed to detect large movements and aggressive resistance. A child moving slowly and carefully through a narrow conduit, making only small adjustments to containment systems, would not trigger the alarms. The hunters had built their security around the assumption that human adults would try to escape. They had not considered that a child might try to reach the lower levels. On the 22nd cycle, Elle discovered that the maintenance systems were not working correctly. Water pressure was fluctuating. Air circulation was changing. The caretaker ran diagnostic scans and found small modifications in the systems. Intentional modifications, careful modifications. Elle checked the child was still in the white room. The child was lying on the floor, seemingly asleep. "What have you done?" Elle demanded. Opened his eyes. "I modified the maintenance systems. The service conduits run through the entire ship. I think they connect to other rooms. I think they connect to the lower levels." "This is sabotage," Elle said. "I must report this to the commanders." "I know," said, "but first listen to me. You are not a hunter, you are a caretaker. You keep creatures alive, but the creatures you keep alive are prisoners. They suffer, I suffer. Every specimen on this ship suffers, and the hunters, they accept this suffering, they celebrate it. They believe that suffering is natural and correct. But you do not believe that, do you? I can see it in how you move now. You are beginning to doubt." Elle stood very still. "If you report me, I will be punished and nothing will change," continued. "The creatures in the lower levels will still be angry. I will still be a prisoner. This ship will still be a prison. But if you do not report me, if you let me continue, then maybe something can change. Maybe the creatures can learn that resistance is not pointless. Maybe the hunters will learn what fear feels like." "You are speaking madness," Elle said. But the caretaker did not activate the communication system. Elle did not call the hunters. Instead, Elle left the white room. In the lower levels, a creature named and had been held in sedation for nearly 2 cycles, and was a species known for their strength and ferocity. The hunters had captured during a raid on a colony world, and had resisted, and had fought. So the hunters had increased the sedation. They had decided that it was too dangerous to leave conscious. But it could feel something changing. The sedation levels were dropping. Slowly, carefully, incrementally. Someone was adjusting the systems. Someone was reducing the drugs that kept this mind clouded and weak. Over 3 cycles and became aware. Over 3 cycles and strength returned. Over 3 cycles and went from sleeping prisoner to conscious captive. Moved through the service conduits. His small human size allowed him to navigate passages that no could fit through. He found the sedation controls for the lower levels. He found the connections to the other containment pods. One by one, he began to reduce the sedation for the creatures that had not yet given up. A creature with armor plating named, a creature with multiple limbs named Sixth, a small furry creature named Peak. Each one reached. Each one whispered the same message through the speaker systems he had learned to access through the service conduits. "Wake up, the hunters believe you are asleep. Wake up and remember what anger feels like. Wake up and remember that you have the power to fight back." Elle watched this unfold and did nothing to stop it. The caretaker knew that reporting would end everything. The caretaker also knew that not reporting meant becoming complicit in what was coming. But complicity had become easier than it used to be. Once doubt entered the mind, loyalty became harder to maintain. Meanwhile, back on 442B, Captain Hayes and David met in the colony's strategy center. The delegation sat across from them, their forms shimmering slightly as they adjusted to the human atmosphere. "The course has changed," the lead named reported. "They have accelerated their journey. They will reach the Hunter home system in 5 rotations. Our rescue window is closing." "Can you extract the child?" David asked, his voice tight and desperate. Possibly, said, but the extraction will be difficult. The ship is heavily armored. An assault could damage critical systems. It could harm the child. We have to try, David said. We cannot leave with those hunters. Made a decision. We will prepare a rescue mission. We will launch in 2 rotations. We cannot guarantee success, but we will attempt it. On the ship, in the White Room and in the lower levels and in the service conduits that connected everything, continued his quiet work. He continued to reduce sedation. He continued to contact the awakening prisoners. He continued to adjust the systems that the hunters had believed were beyond sabotage. The hunters were confident in their superiority. The hunters had never considered that their prey could think in ways they could not. The hunters had never understood that a small child, desperate and intelligent and unwilling to accept the unacceptable, could be more dangerous than they ever imagined. The home system appeared in the ship's viewing screens. It was a system of 12 planets and numerous orbital stations. The hunters were returning home with their prizes, ready to transfer the specimens to the research facilities where the real study would begin. Commander Eth stood in the observation deck and looked at his prize system. He had conducted 17 hunts across 3 sectors. He had never failed. He had never lost a specimen during transport. He had never been questioned. The hunters were superior, and the universe had learned to accept this fact. El approached the commander with false calmness. The sedation levels in the lower containment are showing fluctuations. I am requesting permission to increase the sedation as a precaution. Eth did not even turn from the viewing screen. Increase it. The increase is already prepared, El lied. I only need your authorization to implement. Then do it, Eth said, still not turning. I do not need to be asked permission for maintenance duties. El left, trembling internally. The caretaker had lied to the hunter commander. This was a transgression that should have resulted in immediate punishment. But El had already made the choice. There was no returning now. Instead of increasing the sedation, El went to the lower levels. The caretaker moved through the containment section and turned off the sedation systems entirely. In the lower containment pods, 7 creatures became conscious all at once. And felt the sedation drugs leave his mind like fog burning away. He felt his strength return. He felt his rage, which had been suppressed for so long, come back hot and powerful and undeniable. The containment pod walls were transparent, and he could see the other creatures waking as well. He could see a creature with sharp claws named. He could see 6th, whose multiple limbs were moving now, testing the limits of the pod. He could see them all coming back to awareness. The containment pods were designed to hold sedated prisoners. They were not designed to hold conscious, angry creatures who wanted to escape. And smashed against the pod wall. Once, the wall held. The creature was strong, but the wall was stronger, twice. The wall cracked slightly, and felt no pain, and felt only the need to break free. On the 3rd strike, the wall shattered. The containment pod exploded into pieces, and emerged, gasping, roaring, remembering what it felt like to be free. The other creatures in their pods saw what was possible. They stopped sitting quietly. They began to fight their restraints. They began to attack their walls. The lower containment section's security system activated. Lights flashed red. Alarms sounded. The hunters were being alerted. The uprising was beginning. Moved through the service conduits and reached the manual override for the remaining pods. He worked quickly, his small fingers operating switches that had been designed for larger beings. 6th's pod released. Peak's pod released. One by one, the prisoners became free. The lower containment section became chaos. Security units arrived with weapons drawn. The hunters expected to find sedated creatures waking up confused. They found conscious, angry, powerful creatures already attacking, and charged at the first security unit and took the down through sheer force. Moved with surprising speed for its bulk, using its sharpened carapace as a weapon. The hunters began to fire. The weapons worked. Creatures fell. Blood spilled on the sterile metal floors, but the prisoners kept fighting. They had nothing to lose. They had been captured. They had been caged. They had been drugged. Death was not worse than that. And among them, directing them through the chaotic corridors, was a small human child. Knew the ship's layout. He knew where the power systems were. He knew where the security systems were. He guided them through a narrow passage that led to the energy management section. The massive barely fit, but fit he did, and once he reached the power systems, he began to destroy them. Lights went out in sections of the ship. Life support systems began to malfunction. The hunters' technological advantage started to crumble under the systematic destruction of the systems that sustained it. Elle stood in a corridor and watched a security unit try to suppress an uprising that could not be suppressed. The caretaker made a choice. Elle accessed the security override systems and disabled the locks on the medical section, the navigation section, and the emergency bulkheads. Elle gave the prisoners access to the entire ship. Commander Eth received reports that his ship was being destroyed from within. He received reports that 7 dangerous creatures had escaped containment. He received reports that the human child was missing from its pod and could not be located. These reports were impossible. They contradicted everything the commander understood about how things worked. Eth took a weapons unit and descended into the lower levels himself. He would reassert control. He would demonstrate that the hunters could not be challenged. He would prove that he was still the apex. But the commander had never fought creatures that refused to acknowledge his superiority, and saw the commander and charged without hesitation. The fight was brief and brutal. Eth was skilled and strong, but was fighting for freedom, and that motivation was stronger than any training. Eth fell. In the navigation section, worked with 6 to disable the ship's engines. The creature's multiple limbs could operate systems simultaneously in ways that human arms could not. Together, they severed the power connections to the primary engines. The massive engines, which had carried the across hundreds of light years, simply stopped working. The ship began to drift. But worse than drifting, the ship was being attacked from outside. The rescue team had detected the energy fluctuations from the vessel. They had detected the weapon's fire, the power surges, the signs of internal combat. They had made a decision. Instead of waiting for a perfect rescue opportunity, they attacked. Their cloaked weapons systems emerged from invisibility and struck the main engines. The ship's remaining power systems overloaded. Explosions cascaded through the lower sections. The vessel, which had seemed so invincible hours before, was now crippled and dying. The hunters realized the truth, finally and too late. They had underestimated their prey. An 8-year-old human child had orchestrated a rebellion among captive creatures. A caretaker had turned against the hunters. Prisoners who were supposed to be broken had found strength in cooperation. And now, an external rescue force was ending it all. The hunters began to retreat to the escape pods. They were abandoning their ship. They were abandoning their empire of superiority. They were accepting that this hunt had gone wrong. Reached the escape pod section and found a path to the main observation deck. Through the viewing screen, he could see a vessel approaching. He could see the rescue ship come alongside the crippled vessel. He could see that escape was possible. And then the other creatures moved through the ship toward the escape pods. Elle led them, the caretaker moving between human allies and alien prisoners with equal purpose. Thus, so certain of their position at the top of the hierarchy had been shown that hierarchies built on fear and force could collapse. Looked back at Elle as they moved toward the rescue ship. The caretaker had made a choice, not the safe choice, not the choice that would preserve the hunter's position in society, but the choice that was correct. "Thank you," said to Elle. They made a sound that might have been surprise. "I am betraying my entire species." "No," said, "you are saving them from themselves. That is different." Behind them, the ship's internal systems began to fail completely. The battles had caused too much damage. The explosions had killed too many systems. The great hunter vessel, which had terrorized colony worlds and captured countless specimens, was going to be destroyed by its own wounded pride and the uprising it had never believed could happen. The last escape pod launched as the ship's core began to collapse. The rescue team opened their cargo hold. Human forces, led by Captain Hayes and David, waited in the bay. The creatures of this failed hunt began to arrive one by one, and came through, and the bay crew stepped back afraid. Then Peak, the small furry creature, came through, and the fear changed to something else. David saw his son and stopped breathing for a moment. Was smaller than David remembered, thinner. His eyes were different now, carrying something that 8-year-old children should not have to carry, but he was alive. He was walking. He was helping a massive move through the narrow passage of the rescue ship's cargo bay. David moved forward and looked up. For a moment, father and son stared at each other across the distance that had separated them for what felt like forever. Then smiled, and the 8-year-old boy was suddenly just an 8-year-old boy again. David wrapped his arms around his son and held him close. He felt thin shoulders under his hands. He felt the trembling of shock and exhaustion. He felt the weight of everything the child had experienced. "I am sorry," David whispered. "I am sorry I did not protect you." "It is okay," said. "I protected myself." Captain Hayes directed the rescue operation with military precision. The creatures coming off the ship needed to be processed, decontaminated, and assessed. The human medical teams were unprepared for the variety of alien physiology, but they adapted. They learned. They did their work with compassion alongside professionalism. Elle came through the cargo bay last. The caretaker moved slowly, expecting hostility. The humans on the rescue team stared at the predator who had participated in kidnapping. They reached for weapons. "Wait," said. He pulled away from his father and walked toward Elle. "This is Elle. Elle helped us. Elle chose to help us instead of helping the hunters. Elle is not the enemy." Captain Hayes studied Elle. She saw a small human child and a massive caretaker standing together in an impossible moment of trust. "Stand down," Hayes ordered. "Everyone stands down." "Captain," a security officer protested. "That creature was part of the capture." "And now it is part of the rescue," Hayes said flatly. "That changes the calculation." On the rescue ship's medical deck, and lay on a platform designed for large creatures. They had wounds from the fighting, deep wounds. The ship's medical team worked carefully, aware that they were operating on a creature they did not fully understand. "Stayed within?" He sat beside the massive creature and talked to it, even though one could not understand human speech. "You were brave," said. "You fought the hunters because you remembered what freedom felt like. That memory saved everyone." They made a rumbling sound that might have been acknowledgement. The journey back to 442B took 3 cycles. In that time, word spread through the network, through the colonial communication systems, through the entire settled regions of space. The message was simple and profound. A human child had been taken by apex hunters. The hunters had believed that human children were weak prey. They had believed that sedation and captivity would break human will. They had been wrong. The human child had escaped. The human child had awakened other prisoners. The human child had coordinated a rebellion. The human child had brought down a ship that was supposed to be invincible. And the human child had shown mercy to a who chose to change sides. The story spread from colony to colony, from species to species. In the trading hubs and the diplomatic stations, beings who had never considered humans as anything but minor colonists began to discuss what humanity might actually be. The New Haven settlement prepared for the return. Sarah waited with her mother. The little girl held her breath each time the communication system activated. When the rescue ship finally entered the atmosphere, the colonists moved to the landing field. Came down the ramp holding his father's hand. Behind him came Captain Hayes. Behind them came in on a medical platform, Sixth and Peak and the others. And beside the rescued prisoners came Elle, the who had chosen compassion over duty. Sarah ran to her brother. She hit him with her small fists, angry and frightened and overwhelmed with emotion. Then she held him, refusing to let go. "I am sorry I left you," said. "I am sorry I could not protect you." "You are stupid," Sarah said through tears. "You are so stupid and brave and stupid." Over the following weeks, the colony grappled with what had happened. They had to find ways to house alien creatures whose biology was completely different from human. They had to deal with Elle, a who was living proof that members of the hunter species could question their own society. Elle met with the colony's political leaders. The caretaker spoke with careful words about the hunters' philosophy and how it had never been questioned from within their own culture. "We believe that strength is the only truth," Elle explained. "We believe that the strong take from the weak, and this is correct. But I have seen something different now. I have seen strength in a child who refused to break. I have seen strength in cooperation between creatures who had no reason to trust each other. I have seen that the universe is larger than what I was taught." News of Elle's presence reached the broader collective. The hunters did not punish the caretaker. Instead, they were disturbed. Questions began to emerge within their society. If a could doubt the hunter's philosophy, could other doubt it as well? What had gone wrong with their hunt that an 8-year-old human could dismantle their entire ship? The questions spread like cracks in stone, weakening the certainty that the hunters had built their civilization upon. And recovered from his wounds. The massive creature spent time with, and though they could not speak in words, they could speak in actions, brought water, and sat quietly and allowed the small human to touch his scaled skin. And a human, sitting together, proof that enemies could become allies when they chose to trust each other. 6 months later, a diplomatic envoy from 3 neighboring species arrived at New Haven. They came to meet. The 8-year-old who had been taken by apex hunters was now something else entirely. He was a symbol. He was proof that small things could change large systems. He was living proof that cooperation was stronger than hierarchy. Met the envoys with his father beside him. He was quiet and thoughtful, the way children are after they have seen difficult things. But he was not broken. The hunters had tried to break him, and they had failed. "What do you want to tell the galaxy?" the lead envoy asked. The child thought for a moment. "I want to tell them that being small does not mean you are weak. I want to tell them that families matter more than anything. And I want to tell them that if someone shows you kindness when they could show cruelty, you should remember that. You should honor that. Because kindness is the most powerful thing in the universe." El was present when made this statement. The caretaker heard the words and felt something shift inside. The caretaker had betrayed the hunters because had shown kindness in captivity, and now was telling the entire galaxy that kindness mattered. Back on the home world in the councils where the hunters gathered, debates raged. Should El be punished? Should the hunt have been documented differently? Should something be done about the human colony? But underneath these questions was a deeper uncertainty. The hunters had always been certain of their superiority. Now they were not sure. And doubt, once it enters a system built entirely on certainty, cannot be contained. The honey badger, small and fierce, had turned the hunters into prey, and the universe would never be the same. Sat with his sister Sarah in the evening light of 442b. They looked at the sky together, and the sky was no longer red. The sky was normal and blue and safe, or as safe as any child could hope for. "Will they come back?" Sarah asked, meaning the hunters. "Considered this? I do not know, but if they do, they will know that we fight back. That is enough." The colony around them was changing. It was more diverse now. It held creatures from a dozen worlds. It held En and Peak and the others. It held El, who was learning to live in a way that questioned authority and embraced doubt. It held humans who had been forced to become stronger than they ever expected. And it held proof, in the form of an 8-year-old boy, that the smallest among the strong could sometimes be the most powerful. The universe had learned what the honey badger already knew. Size does not determine strength. Compassion does not indicate weakness. And 8-year-old children can change everything if they refuse to give up. The apex hunters had claimed the human child, but the honey badger had turned them all into prey. These were not just creatures. These were survivors. These were prisoners who had fought back. And at the center of it all was an 8-year-old human child who had transformed from prey into something far more dangerous. Proof that the hunters were not as superior as they believed. By the time the home system was visible on the ship's sensors, the lower containment levels held not sleeping prisoners, but conscious creatures remembering what it felt like to be free. And an 8-year-old human from a colony world the hunters had never heard of was no longer a specimen. He was a catalyst. He was the beginning of something the hunters could not have predicted, could not have prepared for, and could not have prevented. He was the honey badger they had put in the cage with themselves. Facility, you should understand that the facility is not designed for comfort. "Will I ever go home?" asked. El looked away. "I do not know." In that moment, in those few words, something shifted. El no longer sounded like a machine speaking facts. El sounded like someone who was beginning to doubt. And understood that doubt could be a weapon. Doubt could be more powerful than any physical force. If he could make the caretaker doubt, then maybe he could make the ship doubt. And if he could make the ship doubt, then maybe the hunters could be made to fall. David dropped to his knees beside his daughter, covered her mouth. They had left their children alone for just a few minutes, just moments, and in those moments the universe had taken away. The sun set over New Haven that night. The red sky turned dark. Across the colony, families held their children close. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. A child had been taken by apex hunters, and the hunters had left a message. "You are not safe. You are never safe. You are prey."